Hello, Shalom and Charete, YouTube. This is Philip on Water again with James T. Doleman. So today we're going to go through Genesis 1 because, Jimmy, I have some really interesting things to share
Mhm.
today with Genesis 1. And actually, it's not really me, it's more Genesis 1. We're just going to let Genesis 1 in Hebrew share what it has to say. And
Okay.
all I'm going to do is point out some things as we go through if you don't catch it. Because what I've found going through the Hebrew of Genesis 1 is there's a lot of just really unexpected mystical kind of stuff
Mm.
that is really amazing that you can see more clearly in the Hebrew. You can see it in English too, I think, but it's
Mm.
definitely clearer in Hebrew. And you may be thinking, what in the world are you talking about? Well,
Mm.
if you're someone who's casually read through the Bible in English, and you get the main details. You get, okay, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You have 6 days of God creating things. The
Mm.
seventh day He rests. You get the details of what was created when, and you get the details of how these things are created sometimes, and this type of thing. It's
Mm.
it's the creation story, right? Genesis 1.
Yeah.
But there, within the details, there's some just very interesting things that I think are often overlooked, especially when
Mm.
reading through the English. And so, what I want to do is as we go through Genesis here, I'm going to point some of those things out.
Okay.
So, Jimmy, how would you like to do this? Would you like to read the Hebrew and translate, or would you like to take turns, verse by verse? How would you like to
You
do
want
this?
to do the whole chapter? I can do part of it, not
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of it. Um,
Well,
okay.
okay, let's do it like this. I'll read it in Hebrew, you translate, or vice
Okay.
versa.
Okay. Mm.
Okay, so verse 1, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim wa et haaretz.
In the
Uh,
beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
right, right. So far, so good. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Now, actually, we could talk about Elohim here because
Mm.
that's a little weird. If the listener has never studied Hebrew before, they may be unaware of some of the things going on here. But there's different words for God. Like El is a word for
Mm.
God,
Mm.
but you also have this word Elohim,
Mm.
and Elohim is plural.
Mm.
And the word Elohim in different parts of the Hebrew Old Testament can refer to gods, like the gods.
Right.
And if you get into Michael Heiser in his Divine Counsel and the Unseen Realm and some of his teachings, he does a really great job of demonstrating that the Elohim is a broad term that refers to anything in what we would call the supernatural realm. Now,
Mm.
I disagree with the term supernatural. I don't think
Mm.
we should use that term because using the term supernatural kind of plays into secularism. The
Mm.
idea is you have the natural, and then you have the stuff that people make up and believe that, it isn't
Mm.
actually real, part of reality, which they would call supernatural. But it's actually not like that because anything that happens in the world is natural. So, like if you see an angel, that's not supernatural, that's natural. It happens in the universe. So, a better word, I think, would be paranormal. But, anyways, that's a different discussion. My point being, though, that the Elohim are these beings from a different
Mm.
dimension,
Mm.
and so God is an Elohim. The
Mm.
angels are Elohim. The demons are Elohim.
Mm.
These are all Elohim. The
Mm.
difference is they're in a different place in the hierarchy, and they have different roles,
Mm.
and they have different nature, essence, you could say, in some
Mm.
ways. And that gets very theological, of course. But the
Right.
broad point, don't miss the forest for the tree. Don't miss the
Mm.
forest for the trees. The broad point that's being made is that Elohim is an ambiguous term.
Mm.
It can be God or gods. Now,
Mm.
of course, God of the Old Testament does have a name. It's the Tetragrammaton, Yod He
Mm.
Vav He,
Mm.
which, out of respect, I will not say. I will say Adonai or Hashem,
Mm.
which is actually a Jewish tradition. But the
Yes.
Adonai, the Adonai one is closer to Christianity because in the Septuagint they translate Yod He Vav He as Kyrios. So
Videos,
saying
yes.
Adonai, which is the Hebrew word for Lord, is
Mm.
actually a Christian way of doing it, in a Hebrew way,
All
in a
right.
Hebrew Christian way.
Mm.
So, um, I'll just say Adonai, but it doesn't say Adonai all the time. Here it says Elohim.
Mm,
So hold that thought because we're going to come back to this idea that Elohim could refer to gods or God. It's more broader term.
mm,
It doesn't just have to refer to Adonai.
mm.
And so with that thought, let's keep going. And I guess one more comment to make is notice how Shamayim, heavens, is plural.
Plural, yes.
That's something kind of interesting. You know,
Mm,
we tend to think in our modern ways of thinking, and in some English translations, they will translate Genesis 1:1 as heaven and earth, singular, heaven and
mm.
earth. But the
Yeah,
Hebrew is
yeah, yeah.
plural. The concept of heaven in Hebrew is plural, as well as water. You're going to see that as well when we get to the word for water, mayim. Mayim is also plural. So you
That
have heavens and you have waters.
is water plural or dual?
Uh, that's actually an interesting question. So if you, strictly speaking, if you follow the vowel pattern, aim, it would be dual.
Mm,
But I think that that is a coincidence
mm,
because it's such a little word, you know, the word is only
mm.
3 letters. And the only part of the root minus the plural ending, if you think of it that way, would be the first mem. So
Oh,
I think
so
that's probably why
it's not trying to tell us the there are two hydrogens in the water.
that's an interesting thought. I have not thought of this before. Uh, yeah, I don't think so. I don't
Okay,
think so.
okay. I'm just that's just how my mind goes to just
Well, that is a
so
very fascinating thought. Yeah, I'm gonna have to think about that a bit more. No, I think it's a coincidence because
hmm
the Mayim, it's the vowel just so happens to be a patak under the
Right,
first
right,
mem.
right.
I think that's the
Could be,
case.
could be, yeah.
In any case, it's not singular, right?
Right.
It's you have waters plural, you have shamayim plural.
Mm,
So we already see from the beginning of Genesis that they have a different kind of default concept, it seems, of
mm,
certain things like heaven, like water. You know, like we say water, you could say waters, but that's
mm,
kind of archaic and a little incorrect, isn't it? And
Means
maybe a
something
bit poetic.
different. Yeah.
But we say water. You know, we just think of it as water, the thing water. But
Yeah.
they say waters. They say waters. It's like there's seems to be a focus on the multiple constituents that make the whole. The heavens.
Mm,
There seem to be perhaps there's different layers of heavens, and whenever
mm,
you get into the Apocrypha, that's exactly what you see. You see
yeah.
there's different layer. Paul says he was brought up to the third heaven. We
Mm,
were going to see later in the cosmology of Genesis 1 that that
mm,
is kind of what the picture that emerges as you have
mm,
different layers of heaven.
yeah.
And so it's not just heaven, it's there's heavens.
Mm,
And you know you went very you went physics on me earlier.
mm,
Maybe it's a reference to multiple dimensions as well. Maybe there's something
mm,
like that going on.
mm.
But I feel like that would be very, very eisegetical.
Mm,
Um, but it's interesting to speculate. Okay,
yeah.
let's move forward.
Mm.
So the next verse. והארץ הייתה תוהו ובוהו, וחושך על פני תהום, ורוח אלוהים מרחפת על פני המים.
So
So
the
Master
earth,
Jimmy, how do you translate this?
so the earth was tohu vabohu. These two terms always puzzles me. Um,
Yeah,
how do you usually translate it in English? Formless and void, something like that.
yeah, formless and void.
Yeah.
Yeah, these
Vahoshek, yeah,
mm,
yeah, Vahoshek al panei tahum. So the darkness is upon the face of the abyss. Um, and the spirit or the breath of Elohim is hovering upon the face of waters.
all right, yeah, yeah, well done. Yeah, there's actually not a whole bunch I want to comment on here
Mm,
because I think that you know it's very clear that in English what this is what this says, and you know people. I think there's you know you
mm,
could easily talk about this and think about what it's saying and come
mm.
to different conclusions on that.
Yeah.
So this one isn't really the focus for today,
Mm.
um,
I have
but
a I have a very
yeah, go
small
ahead.
comment that I think people may not notice. So Ruach Adonai or Ruach Elohim, this idea is very unique, very special because in the creation narrative or in the pagan creation myth, Ruach Elohim is very like you can say that it's very you can say that it's a very typical Egyptian idea because in Egyptian creation myth the first deity that is that comes out of the one God is actually the ruach, actually out of the breath of the one God. So like and then like you have the abyss and everything. So the imagery kind of very similar. Now I think Moses was composing it in a way that the Egyptian he's in Egyptian congregation will kind of understand what the creation is about. I think of course, there's more profound theological implications behind it, but this imagery is very sounds really Egyptian, and I think that this is very important because a lot of people would say that the first chapter of Genesis was composed very late, but I disagree because obviously you can see some Egyptian dialogue with Egyptian mythology and with Egyptian culture here. So like that, this seems to be only possible to be composed literally by Moses to convey these ideas to the Egyptian congregation that came out of Egypt with the Israelites during the Exodus. So I think this is a very interesting connection there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it looks like it's in the same time, place, and setting that Moses was
Yeah.
in to have written this. And that's pretty clear throughout the Pentateuch too. I mean, there's so many
Mm,
connections with Egypt stuff, like, especially in like Exodus, this type
right.
of thing.
Mm,
So I'm gonna just kind of fast forward some of these verses because it's not really the focus
hmm
of the interesting mystical stuff I was wanting to get at.
hmm
Um, so I'll read the Hebrew and I'll translate here.
Okay.
Vayomer Elohim Yahi Or, Vayahi Or. And Elohim said, "Let there be lights," and there was light. Vayara Elohim et haor ki tov, vayavdel Elohim bein haor uvein hachoshek. And Elohim saw the light that it was good, and he divided. Elohim divided between the light and between the darkness. ויקרא אלוהים לאור יום, ולחושך קרא לילה, ויהי ערב, ויהי בוקר יום אחד. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, day one. Some people want this to say one day,
Mm,
but Andrew Steinman, the scholar Andrew Steinman, has done a really great job in an article he wrote on this, on the usage of echad in classical Hebrew. I say
mm,
classical because we have Hebrew outside the Old Testament and Dead Sea
right.
Scrolls, and he studied that to come to his conclusion.
Mm,
There's some people who want to translate this as one day, as
mm.
if there's a bunch of days before Genesis 1. This is like the, but
Mm,
uh, but he says that echad cannot be used that way in this construction.
mm,
It's used even though it's not the ordinal number. The
mm,
ordinal word for first would be like
mm,
rishon or something else. But echad can be used as an ordinal number. But I think he argues that here it's more likely it means day one, day one. So
mm.
and you see this usage in something called the commentary on Genesis in the Dead Sea Scrolls. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have commentaries, or in Hebrew, that's the word pesher. So peshers on
Mm,
all the books of the Old Testament. In the
mm.
commentary on Genesis, it uses echad in an ordinal way. And so
Ah,
there's good evidence to suggest that it's not saying one day as if like
mm,
there's a bunch of stuff preceding it. It's simply day one in a series.
mm.
Anyways, I just want to say that because I think that's there's so much debate over that one.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right. Mm,
verse 6, Wayomer Elohim Yahi Rakia Batok Hamayim, Wayahi Mavdil Bain Maim Lamayim. This one says, and Elohim said, let there be a rakia in the midst of the waters, and let it be for dividing between the waters and the waters.
mm,
Now, there's already been, plenty of people who have talked about this before, but just for the sake of keeping the discussion going, reviving it and keeping it going, I'll repeat a lot some of that. So
Mm,
it is well known in truth seeker communities that
mm,
this rakia here refers to a hard structure.
mm.
This is not the expanse of the sky. That's what some modern scholars
Right.
wanted to
Mm.
say, because they think that the Bible has to be in conformity with what we think of and with modern science, quote
Yeah,
unquote.
right, right, right.
But that's just absurd. You know, that's just
Mm,
absurd. Moses wasn't thinking along those lines. Those are very modern ways of thinking.
mm,
And if you look at the etymology of the rakia, raka means to beat out something with a hammer. Okay,
mm,
and it refers to like beating out sheet metal. In Greek, the
mm,
stereoma can refer to your skeletal structure in
mm,
Aristotle. And so
mm,
this is some type of structure that is put over the world. Okay.
mm,
By the way, if you read Genesis 1, you don't get the image of a globe. Okay.
mm.
You know, it's like, do you see a globe whenever you read the first few verses of Genesis? If you see that, it's because you're pre-programmed to think that way from what you've seen in school. Okay. There
Mm,
is no globe in Genesis 1.
mm,
The best scholars like Michael Heiser and Logos
mm,
Bible Software, they have an image, and Jimmy, you could pull that up on the video. They have
mm,
an image of the world from based on biblical cosmology that basically the world is flat. It's like
mm,
kind of like a snow globe. It's flat.
mm,
You have a dome over it. You have the sun, moon, and stars revolving around the inside, and then you have Sheol at the bottom. So
mm,
it's I say flat, but it's only flat on the surface. You know, there is stuff below it. But
mm,
the point being, it's not a globe. And
mm,
the second point being is there's a hard structure over
mm,
over the heavens that separates the waters.
mm,
Josephus, who we believe is canonical, says in his Antiquities that the Jews believe this firmament was a layer of ice 3 fingers thick.
mm,
So Josephus lived in the first century. I mean, so he would be able to interpret the Bible in ways that are better than what we can do because he has
mm.
access to traditions and understandings that we don't have.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not he's exactly right, I don't know. But the main point is that it's something physical. It's something hard. It's
Mm.
some type of structure. It's not the expanse of the sky.
Right, right.
But as some people want to take it
Yeah,
as.
yeah.
And so this paints a very different picture of the world than what we're used to. You know, like we
Mm,
grow up in school being shown the globe. You know, we see the fake photoshopped images from NASA
yeah.
of the world from supposedly from space.
Mm,
You know, and those famous photos during the Apollo missions and this type of thing.
mm.
And we think that it's just there's a ball out in the middle of space
Nowhere.
and you have an atmosphere, but there's no hard structure, nothing like that. It's just the
Mm,
world, and there's a bunch of
mm.
worlds, and then here we are.
Yeah.
But the biblical view paints a very different picture. The
Mm,
picture in the biblical view is that the earth is in the center. The earth is not a globe. The earth has a solid structure over it, and
mm,
all the stars and everything revolve around it. And
mm,
you see some of that emerge right here in Genesis 1:6 with the rakia. Okay, I
mm,
just want to say that that's my soapbox. You can find other people who've talked about this in the past, like Rob
mm,
Skiba is a guy who's talked about this a ton. And
mm,
Rob Skiba is not a biblical language scholar like Jimmy and I, but he did do diligent research on this, and he looked into Septuagint usage. He looked into the Hebrew etymology and stuff,
mm,
and I think he came to the right conclusion on this, that this is
mm,
a solid structure.
mm.
That's the only way you can understand it in its proper ancient context. That
Right.
is over the world. Um,
Yeah.
so, all right. Anyways, let's move on from there. That's even though that's really awesome, that's not the thing that I wanted to
Yeah.
focus on here actually.
Okay.
So verse 7, وَيَعَصْ Elohim et harakia وَيَavdel bein hamayim asher mitachat larakia uvein hamayim asher me'al larakia وَيَهِي kain. And Elohim made the rakia, and he divided between the waters which were under the rakia and between the waters which were above the rakia, and it was so. Vayikra Elohim la rakia shemayim, vayahi erev, vayahi voker yom sheni. And Elohim called the rakia shemayim, and it was evening, and it was morning the second day.
Mm,
Vayomer Elohim yikau hamayim mitachat hashamayim el makom echad, vatera'eh hayabasha vayahi chen. And Elohim said, let the waters be gathered from under the heavens to one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. Vayikra Elohim layabasha eretz. Ulamikwe Hamaim Kara Yamim, Wa Yara Elohim Kitov. And Elohim called the dry land land, and the gatherings of the waters he called seas. And Elohim saw that it was good. Wayomer Elohim Tadashe Haaretz Deshe Esev Mazriya Zera Eitz Pari Ose Pari Lamino Asher Zera Ovo Al Haaretz Wayahi. And Elohim said, "Let the land let the land sprout grass of herbs or herb of grass, something like this, sowing seed, and a fruit tree making fruit according to its kind, which its seed is in it upon the land." And it was so. Watotse haaretz deshe esev mazriya zera la minehu. Wa'etz ose pari asher zara'ovo laminehu, wa yara Elohim kitov. And the land brought forth the deshe asev, the herb of grass or the grass of plants, the vegetation, sowing seed according to its kind, and the tree making fruit, which its seed is in it according to its kind. And Elohim saw that it was good. Wayahi erev, wayahi voker yom shalishi. And it was evening and it was morning, day 3, or the 3rd day. Wayomer Elohim yahi moraoth birakia hashamayim lahavdil bein hayom uvein halayla wahayu laothoth ula moadim ula yamim washanim. And Elohim said, "Let there be luminaries in the rakia of the heavens." Instead of saying firmament, I want to say rakia. But actually, back to that discussion, firmament is I think a good translation from the Latin. That comes from the Latin. I think that the Latin did it well there. But I'm going to call it a rakia because I feel like the rakia, you have the image of the Hebrew etymology there.
Beating the hammer, beating the
yeah. So in the rakia of the heavens, to divide between the day and between the night. And they will be for signs and for appointed times and for days and for years. Wahayu lim'oroth birakia hashamayim wa laha'ir al haaretz wayahi. And they were for luminaries in the firmaments of the heavens to give light upon the land, and it was so. I feel like even right here, there's so much we could comment, but I want to get to the thing that I think most people don't think about.
Let me ask one question. So in verse 14, like the luminaries are for also for years, but actually in the Septuagint it wasn't translated as for years, right? It was translated for the circle of time, wasn't it?
I'm not sure if that's, well, shoot, we could check right now. Let's just check. I was going to say I'm not sure if that is translating Moadim or if it's translating years, but we can check right now. Verse 14.
Verse 14.
They will be for signs and for seasons and for days and for cycles of time. So in Hebrew, it's in the Masoretic text, at least, it's they will be for signs, for appointed times, for days and for years. In the Septuagint, they will be for signs, for seasons, for days, and for cycles of times. So in Greek, there's 2 words for year. You have like a year, like an anniversary or a birthday that is that kind of refers to like the proper understanding of year in English. But then you have eniavtus, which this refers to a cycle of time that is set in any point within the year. So like you can have a cycle of time from September 1st to September 1st. You can have a cycle of time from December 2nd to December 2nd. You know, like it's a cycle of time that can happen within the year, and it doesn't have to be a year long, I think, as well, but though it normally would be. So this one is more oriented towards I think the concept of cycles of time, as opposed to a year as an anniversary for something, maybe arbitrarily set. And so there is a little difference. Now, Cherus is also an interesting choice because Cherus, sometimes this is translated as simply meaning time, but you have 2 words for time, right? You have chronos and kairos.
Mm.
Chronos is the word for time, and obviously
Mm.
that's where we get the Greek god Chronos from, you know.
Right, right,
But
yeah.
the Kairos is more like a season and you could translate it as appointed time as well.
Mm.
More like season, appointed time. So the Septuagint does seem to orient it more towards it's for setting times. It's for setting
Mm.
cycles of time.
Mm.
But I mean, arguably, you could see the same thing in Hebrew. I mean, like, because what is a day and what is a year? I mean, those are
Yeah,
also
right.
cycles of time. But
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
I feel like there's even more that we could comment on here, but it's not mystical in the way that I want. Whenever you see what I'm talking about,
Mm.
it's you'll see that there's something quite
Okay.
special about it that I think people have not really noticed as much as what they
Mm.
should. But we're getting
Okay.
there. We're almost to that point.
Mm.
ויעש אלוהים את שני המאורות הגדולים, את המאור הגדול לממשלת היום, ואת המאור הקטון לממשלת הלילה, ואת הכוכבים. And Elohim made the two great luminaries, the greater one to rule the day, and the lesser one to rule the night, and the stars. וייתן אותם אלוהים ברקיע השמיים להאיר al haaretz. And he set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the land. By the way, this word is natan in Hebrew. Natan
Mm.
means to give. It
Mm.
can mean to put or set. And I think that we shouldn't make too much of the English glosses because you can kind of confuse yourself if you think of
Mm.
it too much in terms of the English meaning.
I
There's a
see.
concept. Like you need to think of the concept of Natan. The point is
Mm.
that you're giving, quote unquote, something to something else. So if you say
Mm.
put or set, that can give you the impression that God literally sets them inside the rakia. But I think we should be careful not to overstate the English glosses of the Hebrew. You need to think more in terms of the concept to not be
Mm.
misled there. I just want to say that because some people find a problem with this. They think that,
Mm.
well, how can the stars be in the rakia? But if the rakia is a hard thing. Anyways,
Mm.
there's some problems that I think are solved if you don't think too mechanically about the
Mm.
translation. But
Yeah.
ולי משול ביום ובלילה. ולהבדיל בין האור ובין החושך, וירא אלוהים כי טוב. And to rule in the day and the night, and to divide between the light and the darkness, and Elohim saw that it was good. ויהי ערב, ויהי בוקר, יום רביעי. Okay, now here's where it gets mystical. Okay, up until
Mm-hmm.
this point, I guess you could say it's already been a little mystical, but
Yeah.
up to this point, this is where it gets interesting. Okay, when God starts making the animals and the people and stuff, particularly the animals. So get
Mm.
this, verse 20, I think is where it starts here. Vayomer Elohim yishuratzu hamayim sheretz nefesh chaya va'of ya'ofef al haaretz al pnei rakia hashamayim. So here it says, and Elohim said,
Mm.
let the waters swarm with swarmers
Mm.
of a soul living, of a living soul.
Mm.
So let's first just zone in on this
Mm.
and talk about this for a second.
Mm.
This phrase here. And Elohim said, so sharats, in Hebrew, the verb sharats it means to swarm or team. It can refer to like, a group of bugs swarming around.
Mm.
It can refer to, I think, fishes swarming around.
Mm.
It's the idea of swarming or teeming, Teem in English, or
Mm.
abounding.
Mm.
Um, and so it says, let the water swarm with a sheretz nefesh chaya. Now, literally, this is swarmer soul living.
Mm.
Literally, that's what this is, swarmer soul living. Now, in Hebrew, though, you put the adjective after. So you could translate this as swarmers of a living soul,
Mm.
something like that. Swarmers with a living soul, a living
Mm.
soul swarmer, living
Swimmer.
soul swarmers.
Mm.
And what I just want to point out is if you just kind of sit on this and contemplate on it,
Mm.
it looks like the waters are a part of the spawning. It's like the swarmers are spawning from the water, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
I don't want to say created because that implies the waters are creating it, but
mm,
it's like the swarmers are being spawned from the water.
mm,
Well, that's just something that when you read Genesis, I don't think we often think about this, that the swarmers are coming from the water. It's like God is using the water, you could say.
mm,
They're being spawned from the water. He's not just, poof, he creates them. They're coming
mm.
from the water. And that's kind of an interesting thought.
Mm,
Um, and don't take this the wrong way, but in evolution, in the Darwinian evolution, they
mm,
also would say that life originally comes from the waters.
mm.
Like the idea is that you have the bacterias evolve in the waters,
Yeah.
and then from the waters they evolve to be land-dwelling creatures, and
Mm.
then from land-dwelling creatures you get all the creatures we see today. I'm not saying that that's what happened, obviously, right? But I am
Right.
I am drawing, but I do think that it's a weird coincidence though that it
Mm.
is like that, and and so I'm not, maybe they borrowed from Genesis in a way. So it's like maybe they did borrow from Genesis. They just didn't. They just don't want to say God did it, but you
Well,
do
but
see that.
mm,
But to me it's very mystical that you have the swarming things coming from the waters.
mm,
It's like the waters are swarming around, and then the
right.
swarming things come from it, and that
Yeah.
is a living soul.
Mm,
Uh, and so then you'd have to ask yourself, what is the difference between something that's living and something that has a soul?
mm,
Hebrew seems to have, these are not necessarily the same, though they seem to
mm,
cooperate. They seem to work together. Uh,
mm,
so you have a living shedetz, a living swarmer that has a soul. It has a nephesh.
mm.
Jimmy, what are your thoughts on this? Is it less mystical than what I think it is, or?
Well, honestly, what I'm thinking about is jellyfish because 99% of jellyfish is just water. So it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense that they just out like really just formed by water in different formation and just God just makes a different formation of water and there comes up a creature, that makes perfect sense to me. um and then but also like mm, the sea animals or the water animals, they're not the first life on the in the world. I mean, like you have plants earlier, like you have trees and plant grass earlier than the fish. But what is interesting is the living soul part because apparently they do have a soul, right? Not like many people would think or whether animals have souls or not. They do. Even fish have souls. The goldfish actually has a soul, and actually makes me have more respect to the goldfish, because like they really die very easily if you don't tend them well. Um, and the souls are like the souls are according to Orthodox theology, the souls are the power are the animating source. Like soul is something that sort of uh, gives gives the force of life, like contains the force of life.
So
So
there's a
so
there's a cooperation between these
yeah,
two.
yeah, yeah. But the soul
There's
is not the force of life. The
right,
soul
right.
contains the force of life. So they're two different things, correlated but not identical. So I think that's a wonderful observation.
Now get
Yeah.
now now get this. The waters not only are the waters swarming to spawn, I don't want to say create, to
Mm.
spawn the
Oh,
swarming things, whatever
yeah.
the swarming things are, whether these
Mm.
are insects, whether these are fishes as well, whatever it is, the swarming creatures. Also, it looks like the waters are spawning the birds. So, because it says Elohim said, "Let the water spawn the sheretz nefesh chaya and the birds. Let them
Oh.
bird upon the land." So this is kind of so literally it's like let the birds bird, so literally it's and a bird let it be birding
Mm.
uh, upon the land, upon the face of the rakia of the
Mm.
heavens. So Um, I guess it's a bit unclear because you do have this
Hmm.
verb here, but it kind of looks like that the waters are responsible for spawning the
Hmm.
shedets and the birds.
That's interesting. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and so you have so O for bird, Yofei for to fly or to bird upon the land,
Hmm.
and then upon the face of the rakia of the heavens.
Hmm.
So if I'm reading it correctly, and the waters are responsible for the shedets and the
Hmm.
birds,
Seems to be like it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it does seem to be like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at
Then
least it's like
um,
indirectly indicating that sort of because the structure changes a little bit in two sentences, but if you put them together, it seems to get the hint that water is also doing the spawning of the birds.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like God is using the waters to create the swarming creatures and the birds,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
And
So,
if there is an order here,
mm,
it maybe there's not an order, but if we imply an order in sequence, you
mm,
have the fishes and then the birds in that
yeah.
order.
So yeah, so it's flying jellyfish.
Well, I was thinking about the evolutionary myth,
Mm,
which is that you have fish and then land dwelling creatures, and then
mm,
birds would ultimately come from that.
mm,
But it's like the waters are spawning it. So I get the feeling from reading this that that some of the evolutionary ideas do seem to match Genesis. It's just they completely take God out of the equation. Of course, the whole view is wrong, but
right,
because they
right.
think that it's all about spontaneous creation from nature. But and we don't buy into that. But
Yeah.
it is kind of a weird coincidence that if you actually get into the nitty gritty of Genesis, it
Mm.
does seem to kind of follow some similar ideas, like the waters are being used in the creation by God.
Yeah.
You have maybe if you imply sequence, there's a direction of fish to birds. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Actually, a lot of um, uh, how do I describe those people? A lot of people who actually uh, study the Bible and science and all kind of things and try to put them together in a sort of not mystical way, but they try to find a coercive I'm not co not coercive, sorry, um, coherent narrative and picture, they do realize that actually the quote unquote fossil evidence for evolution actually corresponds to the creation order presented in Genesis 1. So they actually that's very strange for like that actually that just goes to show that that the fossil quote unquote fossil evidence probably doesn't really prove anything. Like they are just materials that you can fit into any narrative. There's some people who feel this way, and
mm,
they feel like very puzzled because like the whole evolutionary scheme was trying to disapprove Bible. Like they try to discredit Bible, but what the conclusion they've got seems to corresponds to what Genesis 1 says. Um
Yeah, it does kind of, doesn't it? It does
yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah.
like before we went over this, like I think for most people on the street who just like know a little bit of Bible, they know enough, like they probably read Genesis, but they haven't looked at the details. If you ask them, "Hey, how exactly did Genesis say God created the fish and God created the birds?" They might say, "Oh, he created them from the ground," maybe because we know God created Adam from the ground,
Mm,
but or they may just say, "Well, he just created them." We don't know exactly how, but
mm,
Genesis is actually pretty specific, isn't it? It says that the waters swarm them,
mm,
and that's where this is where the life and the soul first appear, is the
mm,
water swarming them.
mm,
And so that's just a very it's a very different kind of way of thinking about it, and it's right here in Genesis. It's right here in Genesis, and
Yeah, yeah.
so I thought that that was really maybe not mystical, maybe just like kind of eye-opening to just sit back and look at that and realize what
Mm.
it's saying there. But
Yeah, I
now let's
remember.
go to verse.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
remember when I was reading when I was a kid, I was reading a book like something like the World Mystery, something like that. They've mentioned this already. Like they're not like scientists, but they try to compare science and legends and mythologies and religious texts, and they realize that there are a lot of correspondence. That what scientists says are like really just repeating what ancient texts are saying, but just in a very different kind of framework, different kind of language. But actually,
Yeah, like trying to remove God from
yeah,
it,
yeah,
and
yeah. But actually, what they can't really escape out of the reality of that is presented by the religious texts, like that's there. So I think that's
yeah,
pretty amazing. I think
yeah,
for secular people, they simply need to have more respect to religion because a lot of scientists like when they study their own like field of study when they study to a degree they realize that whatever they said is already presented in a lot of religious texts and sometimes it's not just in the Bible, sometimes in other like religious texts,
yeah.
it's so
I think I think that it could go the other way, and to some extent too. People who love Genesis like we do, and
mm,
who are very, you could say, religious about it.
mm,
If your evolutionist friend comes to you and says, "Well, life came from the waters," you instead of saying no, God did it, you could just say, "Well, yeah, Genesis says life came from the waters too."
yeah,
We just
that's
believe
right,
that that's what Genesis says right here
that's
in
right,
verse
yeah, yeah,
20.
yeah,
Yeah, we both believe life came from the waters. The difference is how did it come about? Genesis says that God is the creative
yeah,
thing that stands behind that. Evolution
right,
wants it to be chance and accident and nature.
right, right.
Their God is nature, and
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah,
some
yeah.
to some,
So sort of a
if you take it
pantheism.
that way.
Yeah.
But I think that, uh, to complete that thought, we could also, as people who love Genesis, be wiser when we talk to people who have this different philosophy of evolution,
Yeah.
and concede, yeah, Genesis says that it comes from the water too, right
Mm,
here.
yeah.
It's just the way that it happens.
Mm,
So let's move on to the next verse here.
mm,
Um, ויברא אלוהים את התנינים הגדולים ואת כל נפש החיה הרומסת אשר שרצו המים למיניהם ואת כל עוף כנף למיניהו וירא אלוהים כי טוב. So this one says Elohim created. So here
mm.
we see the word created again.
Yeah,
Elohim
yeah.
created the taninim. So the great taninim. This word taninim, funny story about this.
Mm,
I think halot, which is the standard lexicon for Hebrew,
mm.
it says that this word means an alligator. It says it
Ha.
means an alligator because in the book of Exodus, this
Mm.
is the word that's used whenever the magicians throw their serpents, whenever Aaron and the magician throw their staffs and
Ah.
they turn into a serpent. It,
Mm.
that the word is mentioned, I think, once or twice in that passage in Exodus, and this is the word that's used. Now,
Ah.
another time, it's used for it's translated as nakash. So, in the
Mm.
same episode, it says that the staffs became a nakash, but in another reference, it says the staffs became a tiny neem.
Mm.
So, apparently, a tiny neem is a nakash. So, what is
Mm.
nakash? Nakash is the word for serpent or snake that you see in
Mm.
Genesis 3 in the garden.
Mm.
So the tiny neem is a type of serpent,
Mm.
apparently. So that kind of narrows down the possibility, I think. But they want to say it's an alligator because they think that, for whatever reason, they think that whenever Aaron and the magicians threw down their rod, that it
Yeah.
became an alligator. But clearly, I think that they also think that because it's an Egyptian context and they had
Mm.
alligators in the Nile, I guess.
Mm.
I mean, but think about this though. Does it make much sense for God in the middle of the creation story to just say he made some big alligators? I mean, like is this really the point that they're big alligator? So let me tell you the Greek. The Greek translates this as uh Gosh, what verse are we on? Is it
Um,
verse 21?
no.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's no verse 21. And God made
mm,
the kete, Tamegala. So a
mm,
katos is a mythical sea monster.
mm,
So in Greek mythology, this is the big sea monster.
mm,
So this is some type of whatever it is, it's some
mm,
type of probably what we would call today mythical. Of course, we don't believe
mm.
it's mythical. We believe it's actually real. But
Right,
in
right.
modern terms, people would say this is a mythical creature that it's referring to. It's referring to a big sea monster type of creature. So God made the big sea monsters.
Yeah.
And I think there's some Jewish interpretation that says this refers to Leviathan. Um,
Mm.
and maybe something else.
Can
But
I,
you have yeah.
yeah. Can I share screen for a while?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I want to
I'd love to
show
see this.
you a sea monster.
Did you look up the Greek word? Is this the
No,
Greek?
this is
Ah.
the Chinese sea monster. Usually people mistaken it as a dragon. It's not a dragon, it's a sea monster. It's a different thing than dragon, but it looks like a serpent. It looks
That
like a
looks
snake.
exactly that looks exactly like the mythical Greek Katos.
Yeah.
If you look up Katos,
Mm,
searching Greek Katos. Yeah. You see that it's a
mm.
yeah. So Ketus. Okay, so in English, it's transliterated
Catus.
as Cetus
Cetus.
or Ketos. Yeah, Cetus. Try that.
Cetus.
Catus.
Ah, ah,
This,
huh,
this.
ah. It doesn't look like.
So that kind of looks, I mean, in general,
Yeah.
especially go to that image right there, that the fourth image. It looks kind of similar to the one that says Villains Wiki fandom. It
Villains
kind of looks
Wiki.
similar to the thing you just shown me. But the
Villains
point,
Wiki.
the point being is that it's a dragon-looking sea monster thing, right?
Right, right, right. But
A
also it
dragon
has a
monster.
long body like a snake or something.
Right. So in Greek mythology, they talk about this thing. So you can find in the Greek mythological text some
Mm,
descriptions of this. And this
mm,
is the word the Septuagint translators chose when translating Genesis in the third century BC
mm,
to translate the Hebrew word taninim there. So they
mm,
translated as the with that word katos.
mm,
And so this is some type of, again, we would say mythical in modern terms,
mm.
but Jimmy and I don't believe it's mythical. We believe it's real.
Yeah.
But in general, that's what people would say it is. They'd say it's a mythical sea monster.
Mm.
So
Mythical
that's
sea monster.
interesting. Now, of course, some people who are really secularized, they'll say, oh, no, it's an alligator. Oh, no, it's a whale. And I have seen a couple translations do this as whale. And in my mind, I'm just thinking, seriously, people, like, does this mean the whale is like really special or something? Like, why would it be whale? I mean,
Uh,
come on, it's not a whale. Clearly, it's not a.
mm,
The word for a whale is a big fish. You see that
mm.
in Jonah, the daga, gadolah, the
Yeah, yeah,
big fish.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
so in Hebrew, they would call a whale a big fish. They don't call it a
Mm.
tiny name. And also, how can a whale appear from Aaron's rod in Exodus? I mean, come on. So it's clearly not a whale. I highly doubt it's an alligator.
Mm,
It's some type of from the Greek context, it's some type of mythical sea monster. Okay, now moving on.
yeah.
Elohim created I'm going to say sea monster. Elohim created the great sea
Mm.
monsters
Yeah.
and every nephesh, hachaya. So Elohim created the great sea monsters, and uh, he created every soul that is living, that
Mm.
is creeping or moving, which the waters swarmed. So here it's
Mm.
clear. Now, remember, we were talking about how it looks like the waters are swarming the birds, but the Hebrew
Mm.
isn't clear.
Mm.
Well, I think because you have this in this verse, that kind of clarifies it even more.
Mm.
The
Mm.
waters are making the creatures.
Interesting, yeah. Mm.
Now, obviously, the waters aren't purely responsible. Again, to be clear, God is doing it, but
Mm.
he's using the waters, basically. He's using the
Mm.
waters to make the stuff,
What is the material?
which is just really fascinating. Like,
Mm.
if you just try to picture that, like, the animals were created from the waters.
Mm.
They
Mm.
weren't just like, snapped into being. He didn't make them from the ground. He didn't just like in the air form them from nothing.
Yeah.
He used the
Yeah.
waters to make them. I don't know. There's just something really interesting about that.
Mm. Yeah.
And so he made even every creeping thing. Now in the Septuagint, this Romesheth, this is the word for reptile in
Mm.
Septuagint. So
Mm.
Septuagint translates this as reptile. Now, the word reptile in Greek, it can be broader than that. It can refer to anything that crawls on the ground, you know. So it
Mm.
doesn't have to just be a reptile. Maybe it can include insects like centipedes and stuff too. But the
Mm.
point being, all the land-dwelling creeping creatures, those were also spawned from the
Mm.
waters
Mm.
according to their kind. Um,
Ah.
and you know, I think that this according to their kind thing, this is where I think Genesis, in a big way, kind of departs from the evolutionary narrative because in the evolutionary narrative, there is no like hard distinction between kinds because they
Mm.
view every single generation as its own development in the broader evolutionary
Yeah,
tree.
there's a tree
So,
there. Yeah.
and so that's a big confusion because they would say they're species, you know, and like every generation is a slightly different species from the thing that came before it because it's always evolving. So they don't have like this hard distinction of kinds.
Mm.
Now, in reality, though,
Mm.
despite you know their belief, in reality, there is a hard distinction between kinds if you categorize it by what can interbreed. Like, for
Mm.
example, a horse and a dog cannot interbreed, but a
Mm.
horse and a mule can interbreed, you know, and different types of dogs can interbreed with other types of dogs, you know, like
Mm. Yeah.
a corgi can interbreed with a Shih Tzu can
Mm.
interbreed with a Chihuahua, you know. I mean, that would be kind of awkward depending on how big the dog is, but the point is that it works.
All
So if
right.
it can interbreed, a dog, a wolf, and a coyote, probably they had a common ancestor, but it was a dog-like thing, right? So
Mm.
the point though is that in reality, there is a kind, and the kind seems to be differentiated, if you want to think of it this way, based on if it can interbreed or not.
Mm.
If it
Mm.
can interbreed and produce offspring, it's probably the same kind.
Mm.
But it seems like what God has done is He's allowed there to be variation within the category of the kind.
Mm.
And why? Why? Well, because he's creative, you know, like
Yeah,
he's
well,
God. He creates.
I guess
He
that's
he
that's
he
very
allows there to be
obvious.
diversity.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
very obvious because like that's observable. Like,
Well, you say it's obvious, but people think that we all evolved from
oh.
starfish, you know, 2 million, a billion years ago. So you say it's obvious, but some people are very confused that it's not so obvious
Okay,
to
all
them.
right.
But um, I
No,
agree.
but
I agree. It is obvious,
I
but
find it very
just
interesting because in verse 20, it doesn't mention anything creepy on the ground, but in verse 21, it actually has something that actually mentions the creeping things that is created out of water. So there's
yeah.
some more difference there, right?
Yeah, there's a difference between here's the groups. So Genesis, and I think this is clear, in my opinion, this is clear in Greek in the Septuagint, but in the Hebrew as well, you can see it. There's a different groups of animals, right?
Mm,
You have the sherets, which
mm,
those are the swarming things. Whatever that
mm,
is, they apparently are in the water, so that's probably the fishes. You
mm,
have the fishes or the swarming things.
mm,
And I think Septuagint translates this as fish. Let me check real quick before
mm.
I finish that thought. Let me see. Uh, oh, no, actually, it translates this as the swarming things is erpeton. So it's the same thing as the remes, the
Uh,
reptile. So Septuagint
huh.
translates them the same here.
That's interesting.
Um, but it does. The Septuagint does say fish at some point.
Right, right, right.
We'll get there. But um, you have different groups. You have
Mm,
the sherets or the erpeton. Those
mm,
can I guess be the same. You have the birds. You have the creeping things,
mm.
and then later you'll have the cattle, the fish, and the man. So you do have these groups that happen.
Ah,
And within these
that's
groups,
interesting.
you
Mm,
have the specific kind of animal, right? So
mm,
like within the behemoth or the cattle, which we'll see later, you'd have, you
mm,
know, like every single type of animal, lions,
mm,
elephants, giraffes, so
mm,
forth, you know. But it doesn't list those. But today, again, we could differentiate those by saying if it can interbreed, it's probably the same kind.
mm.
I think it's
That,
also kind of common sense. Like if it looks similar, it's probably the same kind too.
yeah,
But
yeah.
people don't like to think in terms of
The
common sense
big,
anymore.
all the big cats probably come from a common cat, something like that.
I could agree with that. Like I said, the dog, wolf, coyote, they probably have the same ancestor.
Mm,
A
mm,
lion and a tiger,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
not.
yeah.
I don't know. But a
A
zebra, and
lion and tiger
zebras are
can
normal
interbreed.
horses, probably. Yeah.
So, that
Probably
that
a lot of birds came from the same bird. I could accept that. It's the problem is whenever you start to say like birds and elephants both evolved from,
one
a
mammal.
different thing that we don't see anymore,
Yeah.
like that would be like the missing link thing, which there's no
Mm,
evidence for. It's like, why
mm.
believe that when what is observed is you always have the same kind of animal being produced from the same kind of animal,
Yeah, right, right,
like
right, right.
elephants produce elephants, birds produce birds. You can get different kinds of birds.
Mm,
And again, I think that just goes to show that that God and His creativity
mhm,
is making diversity in the creation. But
mm,
there's limits there, and there's something good about them being according to their kind, as it
mm.
says in Genesis, because God saw it was
Yeah,
good. He wants
yeah,
them to be in their kind.
yeah.
Um,
But the grouping
well,
you mentioned makes me change my biblical biology a little bit, because I feel like there is a categorization of animals in the scriptures.
yeah.
Apparently, sea monsters are one category, fish are different, reptiles are different. Like it's apparent the reptiles are not the same as the cattle, even though they all kind of work on the walking on the ground, but actually, like there's a difference there. So I see there's a difference in grouping here. So I think that's a very significant observation.
Let me give you some data from Murioka's lexicon
Mm,
because he goes out of his way to
mm,
explain the different groupings of the animals in Genesis.
mm,
So for the word reptile, erpeton, he says that it means a creeping animal. I'm reading from it right now. He says that
mm,
it means a creeping animal, or in Genesis 1:20, it's an aquatic creeping animal, right?
mm.
It and he says that there's in Genesis there's a tripartite division of the animal kingdom. Actually, hang on. No, he says that's in HO. Is that Habakkuk? Or is that what is HO, that abbreviation of the
Hosea,
biblical book?
Hosea.
Hosea. Oh, Hosea.
Mm,
Okay. He says in Hosea there's a tripartite division of the animal kingdom. So you have the beasts of the field, the
mm,
birds of the heavens, and then the creeping things of the land. So that's in Hosea.
mm,
So you have this three division. In Hosea 4, you have the beasts of the field, the creeping things of the land, the birds of the heaven, and the fishes of the sea. So that's a
or
tetrapartite
mm,
division.
mm, mm. Yeah.
But those are the same. The only difference is you've added the fishes. So you have
Mm,
these four different divisions in Hosea.
mm,
Now back to Genesis, you have the birds,
mm,
you have the cattle,
mm,
you have the creeping things,
mm,
yeah, so that's in Genesis 6. So you have these three groups.
mm.
Um, and then another note here, the erpeton, which we normally translate as reptiles, they can also refer to insects apparently in Leviticus 11. So in Leviticus
Um,
11:20,
mm,
you have ta erpeta ton patinon. So that's the creeping things of the birds. Well, that would be insects. And
mm. Okay.
so so
Mm,
you have literally it's the insects are the creeping birds.
mm,
So
mm,
the creeping flying things.
mm,
So the creeping flying things would be an insect. So
mm,
so yeah, you have probably a fourfold division of animals. You
mm,
have if you go by
mm,
Hosea 4, you
mm,
have the beasts of the field, the creeping things of the land, which would be like reptiles and I would say insects. I would include that in that. So the
mm,
beasts of the field, the creeping things, the birds and the fish, those
mm,
four. And
mm,
you do see that in Genesis too, I think. You do see that here in the creation. To me, it seems a bit more clear
mm.
in the Greek. But let's go back
Yeah.
here. Let's go to the next verse. So
Mm.
uh we are
You haven't finished 21 yet, I think.
21. Okay. So, yes. So, God Elohim created the big sea monsters and
Mm,
every living soul that creeps,
mm,
which the waters swarmed according to their kind.
Mm,
Okay, so let's just make this clear. The water, God is using the waters to create stuff.
mm,
And again, I just think that's so amazing because, most people who read Genesis probably don't pick up on that.
mm,
And then, and he made every bird that is winged according to its kind, and God
mm,
saw that it is very good. Now, I want you to pay attention to this terminology. It says He made
mm,
every winged bird. In
mm,
Genesis, there's three different words used for bird.
mm,
Okay, so which makes me think there's different kinds of flying creatures besides birds. We're going to get to that.
mm,
It's mystical, but so
mm,
verse 22. Wayavarech otham Elohim lemor paru urovu umilu et hamayim bayamim waha'of yireh ba'aretz. And Elohim created them, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas, and the bird let it multiply in the land.
mm.
Okay, so let them fill the waters. Let them fill the waters. Maybe that's referring to just the sherets and maybe some
Mm,
of the remes. But for the
mm,
birds, they are to multiply in the land.
mm.
Okay.
Probably the sea monsters also fill the oceans too.
Oh, right,
Mm,
right. Of course. Yes,
sea
yes.
monsters. Mm.
Yeah. Let's not forget about the sea monsters.
Yeah, I love sea
Uh,
monsters.
me too. Yes. I want to go find one day,
Yeah, me too.
out on the edge of the out on the edge of the snow globe, out on the edge of the flat Earth.
Uh,
Wayahi voker yom chamishi, and it was evening and it was morning, day 5.
mm,
Wayomer Elohim todsei haaretz nefesh chaya laminach laminach bahema waremes wachayato eretz leminach wayahi came. And Elohim said, let the land bring forth a living soul.
mm,
Let the land bring forth a living soul to its kind.
mm,
Behema and remes. So behema is the
mm,
word for like a large land-dwelling animal, a beast,
mm.
an animal. And then remes would be like, again, that's your creeping thing, your reptile. I always think of a lizard for some reason whenever I see remes.
Maybe dinosaurs.
Something like that.
Mm,
Um, well, actually, that's an interesting thought.
mm.
We believe God created dinosaurs. Would a dinosaur be I guess a dinosaur would be a behema. Be a behema,
Ah,
right?
a
Yeah.
beast. Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
yeah. Wa chayato eretz leminah. Why he came. Um, and uh, and the living thing of the land according to its kind, and it was so. So here uh, you have the land is bringing forth the living soul. Previously, the water brought forth the living soul. Now the land is bringing forth the living soul.
mm, mm.
Of course, through God's
Great creation.
agency.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Mm,
but you see that the impetus that he uses was
mm,
the waters, and now he's using the land, which maybe that can explain like some maybe that suggests that there's a difference between these different creatures. Like the sherets, since they are produced from the water, maybe they are different in a way from the creatures where their nefesh was produced from the land.
mm,
And maybe there's
mm,
something to that we should recognize in trying to determine their differences
mm,
and how we should treat them in the world. So
mm,
I find that to be a very interesting thing because not everything has a common origin.
mm,
If you think of it this way, not all of our souls originate from the water. Not all of our souls originate from the land.
mm,
Some creatures' souls originate from the land. Some originate from the water.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
So there's a
Mm,
thought for you.
mm,
And then every living thing of the land according to its kind, and it was
mm,
so. Um, and Elohim, well, let me read Hebrew first. Waya'as Elohim et chayat haaretz leminah, wa et habahema leminah, wa et kol remes ha'abama leminehu, wayara Elohim kitov. And Elohim made the living thing of the land according to its kind,
mm,
and the behema, or the big animal,
mm,
according to its kind, and every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. And
mm,
Elohim saw that it was good.
mm,
ويؤمر إلهيم نعسى أعظام بتسالمينو كيدموتينو ويردو بذغاث هايام ובעוף השמיים ובבהמה ובכל הארץ ובכל הרומס על הארץ. And Elohim said, let us make let us make man in our image. Now, there's a lot we could say here, right? I mean,
mm,
I'm assuming that people would know about Michael Heiser, so
mm,
I don't want to talk about this too much because this is one of the great things that has already been talked about at some length by him. We would just be repeating, um,
mm,
but in case people aren't familiar with Michael Heiser, we can and his type of thing, we can talk about this a little bit. So we have let us make man in our image. The idea, again, is that Elohim isn't just God. It can refer to gods. It can refer to any entity in the world that's in the different dimension from ours, that
mm,
parallels ours. And
mm,
so, and you have a divine council. You see that in Job. You have God and he
mm.
has a divine council. Not that he needs them. He chooses to run things that way. That's just what he
Right.
does. He chooses to do it
Mm,
that way. You see that in Psalm 82. You see that in Job 1. And
mm,
apparently you see that here as well. So
mm,
God is using his angels. He's talking to his angels, or the other Elohim, and he's saying,
mm,
"Let us make man in our image." So they had a part in it. Apparently, they had a part in it in some way. Though God is
mm,
creating, they had a part in it.
mm,
Let us make man in our image. And so you can see Michael Heiser's stuff for more on that. I won't get too much more into that. There's
mm,
again, that's already been talked about in a great length by him. He did a good job on that. And in our
mm,
likeness, in our image and in our likeness, and let them rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the heavens and the beasts and everything of the land and every creeping thing which creeps upon the land. Now, notice
mm,
here you have fish. For the first time, fish occurs. Well, where did God create the fish? Apparently the
mm.
fish is it has to be the swarming things, I think. It would
Yes.
have to be the swarming things.
Yeah.
So the swarming things would have to include the fish
Mm,
because you don't see fish until this point. It's like, where do the fish come from? But
mm,
we know that the swarming things are made in the waters. We know that the erpeton, though they may be made with the waters, they are on the
mm,
land because it says that later that they're on the land.
mm,
Um, but uh, and there's another interesting thought for you with the evolution thing. They believe that the fish evolved to land dwelling animals. If the erpeton are spawned from the waters, you can kind of see an image there. Of course, the difference is that it happens all in a day, not millions of years. So there's some
yeah.
difference.
Yeah.
But anyways, you have the fish here, the
Mm,
fish.
mm,
So here is where you have a division, I think, that you see like in Hosea. You have the fish, the
mm,
birds, the beasts, and the creeping things. Boom.
mm,
So it's a
mm,
tetrapartite division of animals. Okay.
mm,
So again, fish, birds, beasts, creeping things, those
mm.
four. And then you have man. So man would be the fifth thing.
Right.
So which he's making here.
Mm, mm,
So Elohim he created the man, and notice it uses bara here, whereas previously he did use bara again recently, but he
mm.
used it a couple times here. But up
Right. Right.
until verse 21, he was only using
Yeah.
asa to make.
Right.
So I'm
Mm.
not sure if that's poetic or if there's something significant there. I tend to think there's something significant.
I think so, yeah. But it's very interesting that actually he said let us asa man in our image, but then he
Ah, yes.
bara man in God's image.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. There is something, and yeah, that definitely has to be intentional, surely.
yeah,
So that would imply that the members of his divine council are not creating, but they are making, like in some way, they're playing a part in it. Whereas God is
yeah.
creating. He is
That will
creating.
be very interesting. Yeah, yeah.
That is
That
significant for
will
sure.
that will mean that the divine council actually was like taking like they were actually participating in the creation more or less. That would
In
be
the mm,
that would be
in the
very
book of
interesting. Oh.
Jubilees,
Mhm.
it says that the angels are made, which would be a part. Some of those would be include the divine council members, I would assume.
Right, right, right.
It says that they are made on the second day. Let me check. Uh, Okay. So Jubilees, um, Jubilees chapter 2.
Mm,
On the Lord's orders, the angel of the presence said to Moses, "Write all the words about the creation, how on the sixth day the Lord God completed all his works, everything that he created, and kept Sabbath on the seventh day. He sanctified it for all ages and set it as a sign for all his works. For on the first day he created the heavens that are above, the earth, the waters, and all the spirits who serve before him." So actually, the first day.
the first
So
day,
it says, it says,
yeah.
on the first day, he created the heavens that are above, the earth, the waters, and all the spirits who serve before him, namely
Mm,
the angels of the presence, the angels of holiness, the angels of the spirits of fire, the angels of the winds that blow, the angels of the spirits of the clouds for darkness, ice, hoarfrost, dew, snow, hail, and
mm,
frost, the angels of the thunder, the angels for the winds, and then there's some text missing
mm,
in the fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls,
mm,
and the angels of the spirits for cold and heat, for winter and summer, and for all the spirits of his creatures that he made in the heavens and that he made on the earth and in every place. There were also the depths, the darkness and dawn, the light and the evening that he prepared through his knowledge. Then he saw his works and blessed him regarding all his works. We offered praise before him because he had made the seven great works on the first day. So the
mm.
first day, God creates all the angels, and so and that's that's an interesting question too, because you could ask, well, why does he say we? Where does these we come
Mm.
from? And
Well, it's
Jubilees
our
gives you
image,
an
yeah,
answer.
yeah.
They're created on the first day.
Mm.
Uh, so so there you go. There you go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So so back here, Elohim created the man in his image. In the image of Elohim, he created him, male and female. He created them.
Mm.
Now here, I actually want to give you the spotlight, Jimmy, because I remember a while back we talked about this in terms of marriage.
Mm.
Because there's a question here as to um, well, let me just say it flat out. Are women made in the image of God? Let me
Mm.
ask you this question. So, Jimmy, from the book of Genesis, are
Mm.
women made in the image of God? Who has the image of God? What is Adam? What does Adam mean?
Mm.
Can we revive this discussion? Because I'd like to talk about this here.
Um, well, let me get more mystical, even more mystical. Because when God said, let us make man in our image, when he says our image, even though he's saying to the divine council, when he refers to God's image, he's actually referring to not a general sense of image, but he's specifically referring to, according to the church fathers, he's specifically referring to Jesus Christ. And well, as you know, Jesus Christ is male, so he only created one man according to the image of Jesus Christ, which is Adam. So in this very specific context of uh, of Genesis, um, I think Moses is making the point that Adam, the first created man, was created in an image in one of the hypostases of God
Before
and
Eve was created,
before evil was created.
right?
Um, and so the image, the man who is created in an image of God is specifically referring to Adam being created in the image of second hypostasis of Adonai, which is Jesus Christ, um, and who appears again and again in throughout the Pentateuch. Um, and when it comes to the second phrase of the creation of human being, Moses simply said, male and female, he created them, lacking the phrase in the image of God. So
Right.
it becomes it turns into the idea that um, in the topic of image of God, limited in the first chapter of Genesis, that has that seems not very relevant to females, not very relevant to women. Now, when you come to the second chapter of Genesis, you do have Adam saying pointing at Eve and say that this is the bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. So the women sort of share the image of God by virtue of coming out of Adam. But in the first chapter of Genesis, that point was sort of omitted. You only have the only point that Moses was trying to make is that Adam is made in image of Jesus Christ, the God he met
right?
on Mount Sinai.
And that's why it says, in the image of Elohim, he created him,
Yeah,
him meaning Adam.
yeah,
And then but then it specifies male and female, he created them.
yeah.
And
But
I
omitting
think
the
that
in the image of God. Yeah.
right, right. So instead of saying that this last phrase, male and female, he created them, can be used to justify by saying men and women are both in the image of God or something.
Mm.
It's probably better to use that to justify that there's only two sexes and two genders, right?
Yeah,
Something like that would be better because
that's
that's how
right. That's
God's
right.
intended created order is for there
Mm.
to be male and female,
Mm.
not like a
Mm.
spectrum of different genders, which
The,
is what people are today
yes.
trying to do, like or
Yeah.
blurring the lines. People are trying to blur the
Right, right,
lines,
right.
and
And
so
oh,
it's yeah.
yeah, yeah. So the image of God thing is like that's also something mentioned by Saint Paul when he says women are the glory of man and men are the glory of God. And Saint John
No,
Chrysostom also,
he says man are the image and glory of God, and women are the glory of man.
yeah, 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 that's right, that's right. That's right. You see, St. Paul did make a distinction. I think that is that kind of distinguish the distinction of language is based on the distinction made in the first chapter of Genesis, and that's not just St. Paul. St.
Yeah.
John Chrysostom also in his homilies on Genesis also mentioned that women are sort of they are image of God by virtue of sharing the image of God in man. This kind of idea.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And so in the context of marriage, the perfect true image of God is marriage, when a man and a
Yes.
woman are
Yes.
married,
Yes.
because that is like the rib coming back to Adam. So
Yes.
that's
Yes.
it's
There's a
like Adam.
complete image of God there. Yeah.
So yeah, so to be clear for our listeners, the idea is you have Adam who is created in the image of God before Eve was created, right? So Adam
Mm.
is the image of God. But
Yeah.
then his rib is taken from him. So that's like a
Mm.
part of the image of God, you could say,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
is made into Eve.
Mm.
So when Eve comes back to
Mm.
him and they are married, that union is Adam again. So that is Adam.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the Adam then is the image of God. So
Yeah.
the true perfect image of God is this the idea of marriage between a man and a
Yeah.
woman.
Yeah. And
And
that is
then but
why.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
But then to follow up on that thought though,
Mm.
if you're not married though, the man properly is the image of God. The woman has the potential by extension to be rejoined to the man to be the image of God. So
Mm.
that means that
To be
women need to be
restored to
married.
the image of God. Yeah.
To be restored, yeah. So that means that women either need to be married or
Mm.
become nuns.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
now that's
Um,
a very different view than what some people want to make of this. Some people want to say that Genesis proves that men and women are both in the image of God and therefore we're both equal or something.
yeah, yeah,
Of
yeah.
course, of
Um,
course, then you have to ask the question, well, what does that mean? Equal, like what do you mean by that and by what
yeah, yeah.
standard? And
Mm,
but if you look at the text, it doesn't say that, and Paul
right,
doesn't
right.
say that, and Paul is the interpreter, the rightful interpreter of Genesis for us.
Yeah. The men and women being equal thing, that's a very modern idea. The church has never taught that. The, we're not saying that we're not saying that women are less than human. That's not what we are saying. We're saying that well they of course they share the human dignity, like that's very obvious, but the point is that in terms of spiritual status, in terms of the entire hierarchical order that in God's creation, they are not on the same level as males, and that is that is the ancient view, and that has always been the base, the foundation for a lot of moral teachings in the church throughout ages. It's not about human dignity, because whenever people talking about egalitarianism, they always talk about human dignity as if as long as you lost certain types of rights, you don't have dignity. That's not the point. Like that connection doesn't exist. Like you just made it up. The human dignity and the rights are two different things. A lot of rights are social things, social status. A lot of social status are supposedly given exclusively to males, because that's the role that males play. Females cannot be priests. Females are apart from very um, rare and humiliating circumstances, females are not supposed to be leaders. When you come to the Book of Judges, you see that you have the female sort of female judge, but she's not really the judge. The hero is supposed to be the one who doesn't want to be the judge. Like the female leadership in the society is humiliation
Yeah.
of males, because males are not taking upon their shoulders what is supposed to be taken upon their shoulders. So like I think that's the like that's the plain reading of the text. Like you don't
Yeah.
we don't have much hermeneutics there. Like you just read the text, it's plainly there. So
Yeah. Well put. Well put. Yeah. I think you put it pretty well there.
mm,
Um, on the Judges thing, if
mm,
you read Judges,
mm,
Deborah doesn't really she doesn't have real power. Like it's perceived power,
yeah,
because if you read Judges carefully, everything that she does, she follows the military leader.
yeah,
So the military leader is the guy who's in charge of the army. He's taking his orders from her, or he's cooperating with her,
mm,
but she doesn't really even. I think that the whole judges thing is overstated.
yeah,
Yes, you do have Deborah as a leader, but first of all, and as you said, the book of Judges, the point of Judges is that everybody did what was wrong. They did what was
yes,
right in their own eyes. So it's like, how can you use that as a precedent for anything we do today? Like the
yeah,
point of Judges is to not do what these people did.
mm,
That's the first thing.
mm,
Everything was jacked up. That's the point of Judges. Like
yes,
the whole point is everything is messed up,
yes,
and it shouldn't be that way. That's at the very beginning. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. That's the whole
mm,
point of the book. The second
mm,
thing is, if you actually read Judges carefully again, Deborah is in more in the background.
mm,
It's the military leader, because think about it. Like in that time, there's no way the military was going to follow a woman. You know,
mm, yeah,
there's a military leader who
mm,
she was cooperating with,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and and she was also kind of like a prophetess at some point. So and that's kind of a different
mm,
role, different status
yeah, yeah,
when we
yeah,
take on that role as a female. But
yeah,
the point being is that people are trying to take passages like this, passages like Judges, make it into something they want it to say,
mm,
rather than letting the text guide them to the truth and adapting their ways of thinking and their lives
mm,
to that truth. So
yeah, yeah. And speaking of which, I think one day I'm going to share with you the text I translated, the 15th century text I translated from Chinese about the education of females and girls.
I would love to see that.
Yeah,
I look forward to it. I need you to translate the classics for me as well, please, at some point. So,
I will do one day. Yes.
yeah. Back to this. We're almost done with this chapter. Let's just finish this chapter. And
Yeah.
uh, so, verse 28 says, "Wayavarek otham Elohim, wayomer lahem Elohim paru uravu umilu et haaretz ukivshu ukivshua uradu bidagaf hayam uvaof hashamayim uvachol haya haromeset al haaretz." So Elohim blessed them, and he said to them, and Elohim said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the land and subdue it." So before he said, "Let them rule in the fishes of the sea and the birds and
Mm,
everything," but now he's saying, "Let them subdue the land."
mm,
Kivshua, let them subdue it. In
mm,
Greek, this is katadulao, I think. Let me double check that. So that's yeah, oh, kata, no, it's kata kurievsete.
mm,
So kurievo means to be lord over,
mm,
and then kata emphasizes it. So it's
mm,
even more intensive. It's like to to have like absolute lordship over, to have
mm,
dominion over this
mm,
idea, and let them have dominion or subdue it, and let them rule over the fishes of the sea and the
mm,
birds of the heavens and every living thing that is
mm,
creeping upon the land.
mm. I mean,
Vayomer Elohim. Yeah,
I think the environmentalists don't like this verse because they don't want man to rule over over anything. They think men are like the absolutely bad uh,
yeah.
like existence in the world. But actually, that's like
I actually
again,
think that this is a misunderstanding.
yeah.
Are you going in that direction too? I think this is a misunderstanding. Like katakurievsate
Mm,
and the Hebrew word as well, subdue. It doesn't mean destroy.
you're right.
It means control to take care of it, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
I think it's a misunderstanding.
But
Um,
also,
yeah,
there's something else there. Remember, in the beginning of the chapter, you have tohu vabohu, the formless and void. Tohu vabohu is ancient Babylonian deities. They were the fallen angels, the fallen ones from the divine council. Now you may ask me, how is it possible that the first day the angels were created and the first day the angels were were fallen? Uh, don't take that too literally. Angels were spiritual beings were created out of the time. So even though the so also like the fall of the spiritual beings they have correlation in human history, but they didn't happen in the human history. They sort of happen outside of the realm of time and space of the time and space we understand, and they just like
different dimension.
yeah, yeah, different dimensions. They come, they sort of rush into the first day of creation. So even though God just like f from the perspective of time, the from our perspective time, God created the angels and divine council on the first day, and you also have the fallen beings on the first day. But actually, it's not. We can't think of it in terms of time. But the point is that the whole creation process is like God is controlling and try to take over whatever tohu vabohu were taking over or controlling. Like the whole chaotic situation was being set right, made right, DKO by God um, to to set everything in order and make the voidness what is void previously now God make it plentiful and God sort of give human being this mission of um, fighting against the chaos that's sort of trying to control over the created world. And God has given human being the authority,
Right.
given the human being the power to expand what God has done, to expand this process of creation, making order and plentifulness spread throughout the entire physical creation and like fighting against the tohu vabohu, the voidness, the chaos, the formlessness, the
That's an
nothingness.
important that's an
Yeah,
important comment you make
right.
because it's very easy to read the Greek or the Hebrew here and to think that he's saying subdue the earth as if you're against the earth.
Yeah.
But no, it's not subdue the earth as if the earth is the enemy. It's subdue the earth so that you can protect it
Yeah.
from the enemy of the chaos and the disorder.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like this. But it is very easy to
Yeah.
misread it, isn't it?
And that is
And
why
yeah,
the Industrial Revolution is absolutely evil. You see what harm it has done to the earth.
yeah,
We
that's not
need
the
to
right
go back
kind
to
of
the
subdue.
agricultural life.
Yeah, yeah, it's not the right kind of subdue.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
not
it's a
right. Yeah,
there's
yeah,
a
yeah.
yeah, the right kind of subdue is to make the earth better, for
Yeah.
there to plant the trees, not cut them down and make them into books, which just make you dumber, right? I mean, you shouldn't
Yes.
even be reading books,
We
but
should
according
memorize
to
a lot
Plato,
of it.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Well, anyways,
Yeah.
Elohim said, "Behold, I have given to you every vegetation that is making seed, which is upon the face of all the land, and and every tree which has fruit in it, a fruit tree which has its seed. For you, it will be for food,
Mm.
for achla, for food. Uh, Ulchol chayath haaretz, ulchol of hashamayim, ulchol romes al haaretz, asher bo nefesh chaya, el kol yerek esev laachla, wayahi chen." And for every living thing of the land, and for every bird of the heavens, and for every creeping thing upon the land, which has a nefesh chaya in it, a living soul in it, and every green vegetation for food, uh, it will be for food, and it was so.
Mm.
Vayara Elohim et kol asher asa, vahine tov ma'oth, vayahi erev, vayahi vocher, yom hashishi. And Elohim saw everything which he had made, and behold, it was very good. And it was evening, and it was morning, day six. So, Jimmy, that is Genesis 1. Those are the mystical things. And
Mm. Let's go
I guess
through
not everything was mystical, but
let's go through into chapter 2 verse 3 because that's the entire section.
okay. Okay, chapter 2, verse 1 then. Wayachulu hashamayim wahaaretz wachol tzava'am wayachal. Oh, well, let me read verse 1 here. And the heavens and the earth and all their hosts were
Mm.
completed.
Yeah.
Wayachal Elohim
The
bayom
uh
hashvi'i. Hmm.
the Tzava'am, this is the host. It's not just referring to the multitude of things, but also the spiritual reality behind every existence. Because like that's the military language, the host, the army. It's not just it's an army there. So that's also
Yeah,
one of the that also comes from one of the title of God of Israel. So that's Adonai Sabaoth, the Lord of Hosts. It's a military title. So this
yeah.
kind of idea there.
That is sometimes transliterated in the Septuagint as Sabaoth, which
Yeah.
is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So they do see it as a title,
Yes,
almost as
that's
a
right.
name.
Yeah.
Uh, verse 2, Wayachal Elohim bayom hashvi'i malachato asher asa vayishboth bayom hashvi'i michol malachato asher asa. Uh, malachato. So Elohim completed in the seventh day his work, his task, the
Mm,
things he did, his task, his work, which he had made. And he rested in the seventh day
mm,
from all of his work or task which he had done.
mm,
So that's verse 2. And then verse 3. Wayavarech Elohim et yom hashavi'i wayakaresh otho ki vo shavath mikol mal'achato asher bara Elohim la'asoth. And Elohim created the seventh day, and Elohim created the seventh day. Okay, that's interesting. I've never picked up on that. He creates
mm.
it here at this point. Elohim
Ah.
creates the seventh day,
Mm,
and he sanctifies it,
mm.
because in it he rested from all his work or task, his occupation, which
Mm.
he created Elohim to do.
Oh. That's very interesting. I never thought about God, like Elohim created the uh the seventh
Yeah,
day
it says he
mm.
creates it here.
and
So
sanctify it.
it's not just a result of the sequence of time. He creates it.
Mm,
And
mm,
also the phrase here is kind of odd.
mm,
He rests from all his work
mm.
which he created to do. So why
Huh.
does it say it like that? I'm not sure.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
maybe that's not as mystical as what I think, but it seems kind of weird. Um,
mm.
well, there you
Yeah,
go. So there's the first section of Genesis,
that's
chapter
right.
one, and the bit from chapter two here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess not everything there was mystical, but
Mm,
as you can see, though, if you look more deeply into Genesis, you can see things that you wouldn't normally expect to find. It's like
mm,
you have the I kind of think that they're almost like an animistic culture in a way. The way some of these things are described, it seems like
mm,
animism sometimes. Animism, the idea that
mm,
everything has a spirit or a soul in it. I kind of get that
mm,
kind of vibe sometimes from
mm,
some parts of these early chapters of Genesis.
mm,
Specifically, though, the thing about how all the creatures are
mm,
created from the waters or the ground,
mm,
particularly from the waters, is fascinating. That the
mm,
birds and the swarming things,
mm.
God uses the waters to make them. He uses the ground to make things. Um,
Yeah,
very very interesting, I think. And then the order as well is kind of interesting to sit and dwell on.
yeah,
um,
yeah.
there's a lot that you can get out of Genesis, and I'm sure that if we went through it another time, we would
Mm,
probably find even more
mm.
more interesting details.
Yeah,
So, and as you
yeah.
go through Genesis 2, you're going to see more odd things as well. I mean,
Mm,
let's be real. The whole like first four chapters of Genesis is very like there's very mystical things in it. I mean, you have
yeah.
like the flaming sword and the cherubim at the Garden of Eden. You have
Yes, yes.
Adam's rib taking out. You have the serpent talking, with the tree. You have a
Mm,
lot of just very mystical
mm.
things in there.
Right.
So we
Yeah,
could probably continue this and do another video another time on chapter
right.
two,
That's right.
3, and
I
4.
think a lot of people when they read Genesis, they if they only read in English, they don't really get all those like linguistic stuff and how those languages, how those words are connected to pagan mythology and all kinds of other things, all those imageries that are used. I'm not justifying pagan mythology. I'm trying to tell you that that's the imagery that is used to show you the spiritual reality. Um,
Yeah.
so I think if you just read English, you don't really get that. You only get a very general narrative. And that's why when people try to read the Genesis and compare to a lot of other philosophies, they kind of they can it can become a stumbling block because they don't really understand what Genesis 1 and 2 was really talking about, what Genesis
Yeah.
was really talking about. But if you really go, when you really read Genesis in Hebrew and Greek, study those words and figure out like I haven't said a lot of things, but actually there are a lot of connections between Genesis 1 and Egyptian spells, coffin spells, and the mythologies. There are a lot of images connections there. So like
There's a lot of creation myths that are just very similar to Genesis, like all over the world. Like the more
yeah,
ancient ones, the Egyptian ones that you're kind of alluding to earlier,
yeah,
those
yeah, yeah, yeah,
particularly like they have a deep, there's a deep, there's an abyss in the beginning,
yeah.
and
But the
then you have the
very
waters
important,
being used
very
as a
very
creative
interesting
force.
is that what's very interesting is that in many mythologies, the primeval water, the abyss, is always like lower, like in the lower parts of the earth.
Yeah,
Only in Genesis 1 and in the Egyptian mythology that the primeval water is also above the heavens. And this is a very important connection because that goes to show there is Egyptian imageries used, and that Genesis 1 is not composed late, it's composed in a time when Israel, when early Israelites has close connection with the Egyptians. But anyways,
I
the
think the
idea
I
is
think
that
the
you have.
date thing, the
Mm,
the date thing is something that if you're not a believer, you're just not going to see it. Like no
Yeah,
matter
yeah,
what evidence you have, like
that's right. That's
because
right.
people are always going to believe what they want to believe. Like the only reason scholars say that Genesis was written post-exile is
Mm,
because that's what they want to believe. They go with the oldest verifiable antiquity, and they
mm,
can't think beyond that. Like, but that's just stupid. Like we don't have like the original books of like Tacitus, but we know Tacitus lived. Like nobody questions that. We don't have the original books of Homer,
mm.
but we know that Homer, but we believe that Homer or someone like him clearly wrote it in the ninth century
Yeah,
BC. Like people like just because the oldest copy of Genesis is second century BC, and there's not like hard evidence for it in the way that you perceive it before the fourth century BC, that
mm,
doesn't mean that it was written in the fourth century BC. That just means that you're operating off of this fallacious idea that we can
yeah,
only believe what has the oldest hard evidence for. That is the fallacy of modern scholarship. It's
yeah,
if there is not hard evidence for something, they cannot accept it as being a reality. Only
yeah,
until they find hard evidence will they admit that, oh, we were wrong and we have to adjust our thinking. But that's again, that's fallacious. Like we
yeah,
know that stuff existed even though we don't have direct evidence for it. Like
yeah.
so that's the problem. But because they think that way, because they start from the wrong assumption, they're going to end up with the wrong conclusion.
Mm,
If you start as a believer, then you don't have any problem with any of this stuff.
mm.
And some people think that well, that's irrational, but it's just as irrational to do what the modern scholars do. That's the
That's right.
point. And so
Yeah,
it's like
they,
there
yeah.
is nothing that you can prove on either side because it
Mm.
always comes down to what do you want. It always comes down to
Right, right. Your
what are your
paradigm, yeah,
presuppositions? What's your paradigm? Yeah, it always comes down to that.
yeah, yeah.
So on the other hand, though, I do think you do make a good point. Despite
Mm,
saying all that, I do think you do make a good point
mm,
that the Egyptian stuff is older and it
mm,
has
yeah,
these connections with Genesis.
yeah.
But of course, the scholars are just going to say that Genesis plagiarized from the Egyptians. They're just going to say that, they're going to say that Genesis
Gosh.
in the fourth century, fifth century, whatever, plagiarized from the Egyptians. Is the Egyptian mythology.
Well, you need to have people who actually understood Egyptian in that period of time, because by then Aramaic was the
That doesn't
the
mean anything. That doesn't mean anything. Egypt was still a place. People still spoke Egyptian. There could have been guys who knew Egyptian at that time.
I doubt. Well,
Well, of
I don't
course you
think
doubt.
scholars.
My point is just that it doesn't matter what you say.
Yeah, that's
They're
right.
gonna
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, they're gonna
Mm.
say that Genesis plagiarized from this stuff. So at the end of the day, there is no evidence to prove
Yeah,
anybody's side on either the scholarly or our side. It comes down to what you want to believe.
that's
If
right.
you
Yeah,
can't
there's
see
a
that,
faith.
I think
Yeah.
there's a wall up in your head that you need to get past because that is the reality of it. That is
Mm.
the reality.
Yeah.
There is no like hard evidence. Now, I think a better evidence would be like what we could call a pattern of evidence,
Mm.
which would be like, do you have connections with ancient literatures? Do you have connections with ancient ideas? And I
Interactions.
think
Yeah.
that's kind of directions. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. That at
Mm.
least proves that Genesis is draw. It at least proves that there's a connection there. But
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
have also if you have a like widespread multiple attestation, like the
Mm.
flood thing. Like you have the
Mm.
flood stories in Native American mythology, you have flood
Mm.
legends in Chinese mythology, you have flood legends all over the world.
Mm.
That would prove that Genesis is at least that it's correct that there was a worldwide flood.
Mm.
But you can't really go beyond that because people are always going to take it in different ways. I mean, they're always going to say,
Right.
well, Genesis, by coincidence, it was
Mm.
drawing off of those things, and that's why it's all similar. It's always going to be like that, like because
Yeah.
because because for those scholars, they're always drawing off of only what they call verified antiquity.
Yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
have to have hard evidence, or else we can't believe that this thing, because in their mind, something like the Book of Genesis
Mm.
is religious fiction. It's religious
Yeah. Yeah.
fiction, and it's
Yeah.
not
And
it's not
also,
meant to be his history. It's
yeah.
mythology. It's mythological.
Yeah, I think Western scholarship, especially modern Western scholarship, I don't want to get too deep into that, but Western scholarship has a specific stigma, is to discredit whatever the Christian scriptures is saying, because like that is the cultural tendency, like the entire way of thinking, ever since the Enlightenment. That's just a tendency. it's not rational. It's entirely like cultural, political, and
Yeah,
this
right,
type of thing.
exactly.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, right, right.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um, well, we can talk about that more in another episode. So
Right, right.
let's end here for this one. So,
Okay. Okay.
so